Hey, if you've missed any of the previous talks in this series, you can go back on our Facebook page as well as our YouTube channel and pick up all of them, starting with week number 1 of January. And today we're going to wrap up margins. And I pray this has been an encouragement to you and a help to you in your life. And may today be one more step in your journey to encourage you in your walk with Christ. Here's how we defined margin from the get-go. Margin is the amount available beyond what is needed. It's that extra, it's that reserve, it's that space between what our current pace is and our limit. And I've used lots of different ways to illustrate that. And so margin is that space. In our finances, it's that space between the end of a month, how much income came in, and it's that space between how much expenditures we have. So if you bring in $1,000 and you're spending $990, you have a very limited margin of $10 a month. If anything happens in that month, a tire goes out, mechanical issue with your home, whatever, you could be in some trouble if your margin is that slim. So we talked about the financial piece. We've talked about the time piece, that we all have been given a certain amount of time, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. It's all going to get spent. Somebody's going to determine how you spend it. Today, I want to continue talking about this because in an effort to get the most out of life, what will happen is we will continue to just cram more and more in. I mean, it can't take much more. And so the more I cram in, I got to find little places to put it. There's just no margin. And pretty soon, my plastic bin may just break because there's no more room to get it in to what I need it to do. It's slammed full. And what will happen in our life is our life will be so full, we'll just keep trying to cram more and more in and try to accomplish more and more, and we just can't sustain that kind of a pace. When your life is so full, you are facing a complete meltdown in some area of life. I'm going to illustrate it a little different way today. I don't know about you, but we have in our home, my wife uses this little contraption. Anybody got one of these at your house, something like this? All right, a few of you do. So what she does is she squeezes different things like a lemon. So I don't do this at home. I think I got it right. Did I get it right? All of you said backwards. You need to repent. All right. I have squeezed a good portion of that lemon out. And that's what life is like. We squeeze, we get as much out of it as we can. And then something else comes into our life. Well, I got a little bit left, so let me squeeze a little bit more out. Oh, a couple of drops left. And we feel good that we've squeezed as much out of life as we can. And in an effort to squeeze a little bit more, we can damage some really serious areas in our life. Marriage can be damaged. We had no margin. Our parenting can be damaged. We had no margin. Critical relationships, our financial structure in our home, a business decision is made, and we just keep stressing our life by trying to get more and more out. And we say, you know what? I've got a little bit left in the tank. Let me go for one. Oh, there's 3 more drops that I could squeeze out. And for some in this room, some of you watching by way of internet, you have lived life on the edge. Man, you have maxed it out. You have lived all the way to the edge of life. There is no room for error. There is nothing left over in the lemon. and you hit a financial bump, you hit a relational bump, and it can be devastating. A financial bump in your life, in your marriage, in your family could be devastating. A relational bump can be devastating. And we think, I'm just going to squeeze a little bit more out. I have a little bit left over. Then you get on email and you get an email, or you see a social media post, or something changes in your life with a phone call, and you think, man, I don't have any more to give. But I'll try. I'll put two hands on it and I'll squeeze even harder. And you squeeze everything you can. So today, in wrapping up our series, I'm going to run a little bit of a risk here. I'm going to be vulnerable with a little bit of my journey, because I've been here. Some of you have been here. In the fall of 2008, I was a family pastor, youth minister up in New York. 3 incredible children, a wife, incredible wife. And we had a son in elementary school and 2 girls, one in high school, one in middle school. And man, we loved what God was doing. Church was growing rapidly. We had come there earlier in the 2000s, and it was a church of 12 or 13, 1,400. And it had grown to 5,000 plus, and man, multiple campuses. And we were doing marriage ministry with lots and lots of couples, and I had a great team. And I got invited to speak at the Chick-fil-A resort up north of Atlanta called Windshape. And they bring in 40 leaders twice a year from around the country, and I was invited to come in and kind of represent a specific genre of ministry. So Darlene went with me, and we had rented a car. We flew into Atlanta and rented a car, went up to the north side of Atlanta, and they don't have TVs and phones at the Chick-fil-A resort. And so it's just a time of getaway, a time to just spend some time together. And so I was scheduled on the last day to speak, and it was right after lunch. So it's kind of the last, people are already catching flights out. So, I mean, that tells you kind of where I prioritized in the speaking venue. I was the last speaker after lunch. Everybody's got a full tummy, and everybody was ready for a nap or ready to go home. And the night before, we grabbed the big comforter off of the bed, Michelle, and we went out to the rental car. I can't look at you because I'll cry. And we got on the hood of the car. We took a blanket. It was freezing cold in Atlanta. And we took the blanket, we wrapped up and laid on the hood of the car and looked up at the stars. And we just had one of those moments. And I said, I think we need to talk about something. God's been stirring my heart to pastor a church. You got to remember, man, when we got married, I was a businessman. God called me into ministry, and we made that shift. And now here we are in 2008. All is well. We're loving life, and felt like God was calling me to pastor a church. So we talked about it. I said something like this. I believe that God wants to use me to reach every man, woman, and child in another demography. Because that was kind of the catchphrase we used in our church in New York. And we didn't even know, where that was going to be, what that was going to look like. And we went into a season of prayer. We spent 90 days praying and talking to God, reading through a book together called Prayer by E.M. Bounds, and just, God, what journey do you want to take us on? We got our pastor involved, and he was extraordinary in the process. All that to say, after 2.5 years of this journey, God opened up a door at a Baptist church on Highway 27 between Mineola and Leesburg for me to become the senior pastor of a church. And so we moved, two girls in high school at the time, both ball players and academically doing strong. Our son was in middle school. And we moved to Florida from New York and began to transition a hurting church. We were coming from a very healthy model into a hurting model church. It had been hurt from multiple splits. The church was about right at just 10 years old and had been through 4 splits. And so we knew what we were getting into. There was a lot of debt. There was no trust in leadership. People didn't trust if whatever. There was a cut and paste bylaws. There was a severely damaged community, lost community, who really didn't understand the dysfunction of the local church. But we had a God-sized vision and a lot of energy and a lot of excitement, and more importantly, a calling. Do not underestimate God's calling on your life. No matter how difficult or challenging it may be. And again, I had 2 girls in high school, a wife, a son in middle school, and now pastoring a stressed out church. A church that had a little lemon juice left. You ever been stressed out? Yeah. A lot transpired, and in the summer of 2015, Darlene and I, our leadership team, were introduced to a place called Haynes Creek Baptist Church. And it was a church that had experienced some decline and some challenges of their own. And they had a building and a group of people, for the most part, all senior adults that really just wanted to see their building used for the glory of God. And after months of conversation, months of prayer and talking, the church where I was pastoring purchased this building for $363,000. And we began the process of renovating a church. We were interviewing for staff positions. There were contractors in and out of this building as we were renovating. We actually had an accident during the renovation. A lady had fallen in the back, severely injured. My stress level was going up. We had a lot of responsibility on the other side of town, but now new responsibility over here. And I went home one day and said, Darlene, I need your help. Can you kind of come over to this campus every day and help us, because we've got lots of people, and there were people sitting in this room that partnered with my wife to come over here and work with her, and I am forever indebted. But we just believed that what God had called us to was bigger than our own personal capacity. Every day brought new challenges and new demands, and I only share this with you to help you see something, and there's going to be a really strong point for all of us here at the end. I'm a guy that likes to work. I love my job. I love what I do. I'm a hardworking guy. And so 10 hours turned into 12-hour days, and 12-hour days turned into 14-hour days. 14-hour days turned into 16-hour days. 16-hour days turned into 18-hour days. And there were days that were 20, 21, and 22-hour days for me because we had work to do. We got a new church to open up. I remember one day I came over here around 2 in the morning because we had some floor covering coming, and we just weren't ready. And so I was in the back hallway on my hands and knees, cleaning and preparing because the floor covering was coming around 7. And about 5:30 or 6, Tim walked in that morning because Tim was working over here every day, and I was already here. And so we had a brief conversation. All of this was going on while I was a husband and a dad of 3 kids. Now, at this point, I've got 2 girls in college and a son in high school. So what do? I just cram more in. That's what it required. That's what the job required. There's got to be a little left in the tank. so I could just squeeze a little bit more. Some of you have never heard this story. Some of you have heard bits and pieces of it. And as I continued to squeeze more and more, let me just say, man, I love my wife, I love my children, I love my family, and I love my job, but there was now tension for me. Because I don't know about you, but my body can't sustain an 18 to 22-hour workday. I can do it once or twice, but I couldn't sustain it. But every day, those who knew me knew, some days I felt like this. And then there were days I felt like this. I'm going to help you to see something really important from the Word of God today. The more I squeezed, and listen, I'm a pastor. I study the work of the church. I love the church. I've seen business leaders. I've seen church leaders. I've seen church leader kids. And there are all too many of them that have either burned out or something has gone squirrely in their life. And with the growing tension being in ministry, I knew what the end of the story might look like for me. But there's work to be done. So I would come to work, drive to work, one of the two campuses, and say things like, Lord, could you take care of my home while I do the work of the church? And at the time it seemed glamorous, even right. Until September 2017. It dried up. No juice left. No more room to cram. There's nothing left. And I want to tell you from personal experience, you only have so much time, so much resource, so much capacity. And what was it that gave? Because remember, I'm a husband and a dad, a pastor. It was my personal health. I began wondering and thinking as I laid flat on my back sick. I'd never been sick like this before. What am I communicating to my children? What am I communicating to my spouse, to those who know me best? What am I modeling for the young dads of our church? And so it was during this time that some really good friends of mine, including the elders of our church, began to speak into my life that I needed margin. Maybe you've been in a situation similar to this. I thought long and hard about even sharing this with you because some of you don't know any of this journey. Some of you know some of it. There were some really key people in my life like Alex and Steve and Jim. In the fall of 2017, there just was nothing left. And we were about to open up this campus. So after some really good friends speaking into my life that, David, you need some margin, I resigned from boards that I served on. I resigned from some relationships that I had that just were not fueling me. I stepped back from the hours that I was working. And I thought, like many of you, I've gutted it out as long as I can, but I'm potentially making a bigger mess. See, here's what happens in our life when we tap out. There's nothing left. What'll happen is we make a mess. Here's what's happened. Rudy, can you help me out? My weight of responsibility then is past. And there's some people in my life that would be more than willing to take on the weight of responsibility with me. Rudy's one of them, one of our youth leaders. And I pass off a weight of my responsibility to Darlene, to Rudy, to Tim, to Alex, to Jim, to Barbara, to staff, to friends, so that I can squeeze a little bit more. If I could release a little bit of my journey to somebody else, maybe it'll leave some room for me to squeeze a little bit more out. The problem we have is we never go back and take back our responsibility. And I'm telling you, I know there are people here that are going to experience in the future what I'm talking about, or maybe you've come through it, or maybe you're in the middle of it. And I knew as I was praying going into today that you have passed off responsibility in hopes that somebody else will carry the weight for you. Well, what if Rudy's responsibility gets strong and heavy? He's going, well, maybe I need to help out my pastor here. I need to help out my friend, or whatever that looks like. And pretty soon, that weight starts to get a little heavier. I said, come on, Rudy, you can do this, man. Lift that weight up. Get that thing up over your head. Lift that weight and just hold it there. It's more important that we do God's work. It's a church. It's good. Let me set it down. I think everybody gets the picture. And what will happen is you could carry somebody else's load, or you're passing off their load. And for all of our young families in this room or watching by way of internet, if you're still in the parenting years, here's what it sounds like. I'm only going to miss one game. I'm only going to miss that one recital. I'm just not available for that dinner appointment because we're so overcommitted that we've even had to pass off some of our responsibility for others to carry. When time goes by and the tension has grown in our lives, the tension now for a friend or a spouse or a family member grows. You miss more games, more birthdays, an anniversary, or your parents' 60th anniversary, because there's nothing left. You've squeezed it all out. Today, I wanted to just encourage all of the men in the house. We have to live and lead by example. Because when the weight drops, people get hurt. When I cram in one more hanger into the closet, the shelves are going to break. You say, well, Pastor, that's not me. I can handle it. I can handle it for a season. That's what I said. And by the way, you may have twice, 3 times the capacity that I do. I get that. Here's what I know. We all have limits. But we have a challenge. I think we know we have limits. But we are ingrained into our culture that we love progress. And progress is not a bad thing. We need progress. But when it leads you to where you're no longer able to contribute, then something has to give. I'm just going to say, man, I want to talk straight into your grill right now. It's your marriage that will give, your children that will give, or your job that will give, or your personal health that's going to give. It's going to be one of those 4 things. Because you and I don't have an unlimited amount of emotional capacity. And so relationships are going to suffer as a result. So in the fall of 2017, when I did not feel well, and man, I was so bummed because I was so excited about what God was doing, and I began to have some of those really difficult conversations, beginning with my awesome bride, who really was a caregiver during this time to me, and our incredible elder team, and some national leaders that I respect greatly began having some of those great conversations with me. I just knew I was in a place I had to say no to some things, some organizations, I was coaching a lot of area pastors and churches and helping other churches have a sense of success and pastors and some partnerships, all because I needed to build margin back into my life. That's why this series is so critical. You got to build margin back into your life because life really has to be approached more from a marathon standpoint than a sprint. It doesn't mean, I believe that Jesus is coming back, and I believe he's coming back soon. But we better prepare our bodies, our emotional capacity, and spiritually be in tune with God that we can handle the load that God has placed on us without continuing to place more on ourselves at the expense of what it's going to cost us down the road. So here is what came out of the fall of 2017 with some really valued relationships. And it was a guy that said, I want you to just list your priorities and put them in order. Here's what my list looked like. God, marriage, family, job. And in this order. I hope you get that. You realize you're part of the job piece, right? God, marriage, family, job. Because I had gotten that messed up. And in the midst of doing some good things, I wasn't doing the best. Here's why I want you to see this up here, because I think there are husbands in the room, or potential to-be husbands, or brand new husbands. Congrats, by the way. You better make this list a priority, or you will come to a point in life, you'll squeeze and there's nothing left. You'll say just one more shirt, one more pair of jeans, one more, and there's just not enough. And so what we'll do is we'll just pass it off, and we'll say, well, here, take some of my weight. Help me. And there's people that will help us. So I'm going to take just a few minutes. All the ladies in the house, I hope you will bear with me. I want to talk to our guys. Here's what I knew, but I chose to ignore because there was work to be done. More floor coverings coming. More paint needs to get on the walls. Got to get all this stuff done. So I went back to the basic fundamentals of what I've taught for years and years, and I know to be true from the Word of God. I said, okay, God, I'm going to land and start with marriage. And by the way, let me just say, marriage was not in trouble. Not that I know of. It wasn't. But I had a very concerned bride because I was pretty sick. Here's what I went back to. Paul wrote to the church in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse number 21, and this is in the context of marriage. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Meaning that I needed to put the needs of my spouse above my own needs. Guys, and again, I was a marriage pastor for a number of years and really enjoyed that piece of ministry. If you want to have an awesome marriage, learn Ephesians 5:21. Commit it to heart. Don't let go of it. Because there are going to be a lot of things, a boss, a job, ambition, career, whatever that's going to come and it's going to squeeze you. I was hoping there would be a drop left. There it is. And it's going to squeeze you. But God gives us a design for our lives that begins, if you're married in the room, that begins with Him first, spouse second. Not church, spouse. We have not been called ever in Scripture to submit ourselves to our career. Interesting, isn't it? But culture wants you to submit to the career at the expense of marriage. He goes on to say 4 verses later in verse number 25. For husbands, this means love your wives just as Christ loved the church. He gave up His life for her. Husbands, this means love your wives just as Christ loved the church. It doesn't say whether she deserves it or not. This is an unconditional love because if you look at the paradigm of the church, Christ loved us in spite of our sin. Romans chapter 5. And laid His life down. So I want to encourage the dads, the husbands, the men, particularly those that are in a marriage or in a family unit. Set aside your ambition, your drive for progress, and exhaust yourself on having a great marriage first. Now, that's going to be countercultural. And you're going to have a boss tomorrow when you walk into work that's going to demand. I'm calling on you to demand of yourself spiritually more in your marriage. Because the truth of Scripture is where it's at. And again, there was no disaster in my marriage, but there was disaster in my life physically. And the tension that would mound on me thinking, man, what are the people of our church going to think? They're going to need me to be there. When they're in the hospital, they want me to be there. Who's going to lead that group if I don't lead that group? How is the ministry going to thrive if I'm not there? If I leave the office at 4 and somebody calls at 5 and I'm eating dinner with Darlene and my children, what do I do? Fear, fear, fear of what others would think. And that's why I want to say to you, we have to recalibrate sometimes and come back to, and sometimes it's a friend, a pastor that speaks into our life. Today it's me speaking into your life as a pastor, saying to you, friends, make sure that you've got the priorities straight, because somebody's going to lose out in the way that culture is driving us to do more and to progress more and be more. Somebody's going to lose. Don't let it be your spouse. And God forbid, we all know stories of pastors' kids. And I knew I don't want my pastor's kids to be in that role because they're my children. So although I may have been thinking at times, Lord, take care of things at home while I do the work of the church, it was in the fall of 2017 that I began, as people were breathing into my life, including Darlene and my children. And I said, Lord, would you take care of our church while I take care of our home? Thanks, Alex. Oh, God of this universe, God of the economy, God and creator of all things, do you think you could handle this church? God, if I put in 40 or 50 hard hours of work into this church, you think you could handle the rest? After all, it's yours. And I'm stealing what is rightfully yours. So God, in my absence of being present with you, would you do a work in us? Became my prayer. And guess what? God's doing an awesome work in us. And what dawned on me and again, I knew these things. You got to know, I knew these things, but sometimes you just choose to ignore. And when I came down to the reality of, David was out in Oregon to go to Oregon State. Danielle was up in graduate school in Wake Forest, North Carolina. Dayla was over in Lakeland in college. I discovered there's 2 unique roles I have in life, that not one single person in life has these 2 roles but me. Number 1, Darlene's husband. Nobody else in this room is her husband. She gets 1, hopefully only 1. And it's me. God, marriage, family, job. And in that order. So I have this unique role with her. Nobody else can fill that role but me. I better do that role well. My second unique role in life is that my 3 children only have one dad, and it's me. Nobody else is going to serve in that role. You know what's interesting, though? There'll be a day that I won't stand here and be the pastor and the preacher. Somebody else can serve this role. There'll be a day that I don't serve in some of those specific roles, but I have 2 unique roles in my life. And one is to be a husband, and one is to be a father to 3 children. And if I can, God, I'm right with you, I'm right with my marriage, I'm right with my children, now God can bless job as he sees fit. And why would I take the uniqueness of what God has wired in me to do through me and pass that off to anybody else? So all of the younger dads in the room, maybe moms in the room as well, if you're a single parent, you only get one first baseball practice. And there's lots of people in this room that know this. You only get one cheerleading camp, one first teacher-parent meeting, one first day of school, one first ride on the school bus, one first 16th birthday. Only one 16th birthday. There's not a first and a second. There's only one. There's only one last game. There's one graduation. One first day of college. And then, isn't it interesting? That time is gone. And I'll just tell you, from my shoes and sneakers that I wear, I had to let God do what God wanted to do and reposition myself under His authority. And that's hard to say. But I'm only limited to so much time, so much energy, so much capacity, just as you are. And I decided that I wanted to be able to look back on my life and not wonder, what if I had walked by faith? But I wanted to walk by faith and trust Him. So today, I want to encourage our families. And by the way, if you're a grandparent in here, man, may you model this now, even if you didn't for the first 40 years. Model it now. What if we just trusted God? You know what the most repeated commandment in all of the Bible is? Fear not. And yet, fear shows up when we think we have to do it all. And we eliminate God's presence. As we sang Waymaker this morning, my mind knowing what I was going to talk about with you today. I am burdened in this church that we go beyond a Sunday morning environment. Those two got to have more than a Sunday morning environment. That little baby girl back in the nursery's got to have more than a Sunday morning environment. It's going to take some men and some women to stand up and say, listen, I'm going to grow to be more like Jesus so that I can pass down the inheritance of spirituality. Not the inheritance of a financial checkbook. It's about passing down a spiritual heritage to our children so that they then can carry on a spiritual heritage to their children so that you get 2 generations of spiritual generation. But it's going to require that we become wise in how we handle our margin, because the last place you want to be is there's nothing left. I can squeeze and squeeze and squeeze. There's nothing left. And when you get to that point and there is no margin, we can say all day long, well, I've got enough capacity to get through this season. When's the season end? So fear not. Fear not what man would say, but you better fear what God would say. And I'm telling you from personal testimony today, listen, I don't like even talking about it. But man, I'm a human being that wants something extraordinary in my life, like most of you in this room. I want to do something great for God, but I got to trust Him. And you have to trust Him. You can't just work your whole life at a job and hope that the marriage and the family turns out okay. It doesn't work that way. That's why God said, Husbands, submit yourselves in this relationship. Spouses, submit yourselves in a relationship. And hey, by the way, husbands, you need to love your wife unconditionally. That's what sets the trajectory of a family on right ground. So today, it is as simple as Ephesians 5:21, 5:25. May we prioritize our lives. God, you are first and foremost. Then, if in a marriage, my marriage is second. My family is third. If you're not in a marriage and you got family, then family slides into number 2 role. But job is not number 2. Job is not number 1. So, in an effort to get the most out of life, in an effort to squeeze more and more, I don't want you to look like that. I don't want you to be an old shriveled up lemon. I want you to look like this. So that as God leads in your life, because you've established good margin, when it's time to give, man, you got it to give. There's stuff left in the tank to give. Emotional capacity is there, so relationships can be thriving because you got it in the tank and you've not spent it. You remember about 3 weeks ago I shared with you the lady that wrote a book on life regrets? The top 2 regrets all time for people. Number 1, every single man 100% listed. I wish I hadn't worked so much. What else would you have done with your time? Sit and play video games? No, the principle is spend it in your marriage and your family rather than exhaust yourself on a boss that may not even be there next year. And for some of you, you're praying he's not or she's not. All right. I'm pressing stop right there. I've said everything I can say to you in this margin series. I told you when I started day 1 in this series, I needed this. And you need this. We have to establish margin in our life.